Concluded our reading of The Lie by Kurt Vonnegut Jr., we can analyze our story. So, as you may have noticed, this story is different from the other stories we have read because it takes place in our ordinary world. However, we would still say there is some satire through the characters and their actions. So, we have the story following the Remenzel family riding in a chauffeured Rolls Royce to the White Hill School, an exclusive private preparatory school. The Remenzels have attended White Hill since the 1700s. You would say they're the example of old money. And some references in this story that are Cold War references. You have the African students, welcome to White Hill, were not invented at random. The lie appeared in 1962, the height of the Cold War, just as many African nations were winning independence from Europe colonial rule. The United States and the Soviet Union competed for the friendships of these new countries. The U.S. State Department really did sponsor African students at American schools and university as a form of diplomacy. Vonnegut plants that real history in the background and then uses it to test the schools. The Remenzels talk about standards. So I might say that might also be a little ironic because in the Remenzel, Dr. Remenzel obviously wanted his son to get this special treatment. And it's possible that these African students also received some special treatment because their parents were using the United States as a way to gain access. This favor would have gained them access to resources in their whatever their country might be. And then you would have their terms to know here. And if we go to our questions. So if you have answered the 3 comprehension analysis questions, we will review them now. The title points to Eli's lie. Obviously, our story is titled The Lie. Tearing up the rejection letter so his parents never see it. But Eli may not be the only lie in the story because you have Dr. Remenzel insisting that the Remenzels never asked for special treatment. And Sylvia repeatedly calling herself a simple-minded country girl. By the end, who is being dishonest? Well, most definitely Dr. Remenzel. Because in our story, after we find out that Eli didn't get in, Dr. Remenzel was extremely angry, and he had said that he was going to talk to the other board members. So we can assume here that Dr. Remenzel didn't want anyone to have special treatment until it came to his own son. And then he definitely wanted that treatment because we never did find out his scores. I mailed it myself. That was when he was talking to a guy. And he said the first thing, so this would be the best quote, I think. Or, well, there's many quotes you could use, but if I was going to do it, I might use this quote. The first thing Dr. Mendel said quite loudly is, get Eli admitted to White Hill. After that, we'll find him and we'll bring him back. So if he wasn't admitted, fair is fair. And you have the irony is Dr. Remenzel was yelling at Sylvia saying he can't have a room with a fireplace, he can't have the blazer, we're not asking for any special treatment. But the biggest form of special treatment would have been allowing him to enter the school despite his horrific test scores. So that's definitely an example of the irony here. And also say that Sylvia is far from a simple-minded country girl at this point in her life. I mean, she's at this school, she has her husband, she makes all these comments about the scholarship boys when she was saying things like, isn't that nice that the scholarship boys are there? I mean, technically, she would have been a scholarship girl, but obviously the women weren't allowed to go to this school at this time period. It would have been an all-boys school. So you could say that Sylvia is also definitely a hypocrite here with her simple-minded country girl because that is in no way, shape, or form what she actually is. Yeah, so whatever you have for this answer and your interpretation, whatever characters you picked, just make sure you back it up with some details from the text. Doesn't have to be direct quotes. You could just paraphrase a certain event or conversation that you found to be ironic. And our question 2, a foil character is a character whose contrast with another character highlights important qualities. Tom Hillier the mechanic's son, and scholarship graduate, driving a battered Chevrolet, arrives at Whitehill the same day as the Remenzels in their Rolls Royce, and his son has earned the highest entrance examination score in school history. How does Vonnegut use the Hilliers as a foil for the Remenzels? What does the contrast between the two families reveal about the difference between earned achievement and inherited privilege? Notes for this one. Obviously, we have the cars. And you would have the cars are shorthand for the two paths into Whitehill. Inheritance versus merit. So merit would be you earned it. The fact that Tom Hillier, he was on a scholarship as well on talent, and then his son earns the highest. Every Hillier achievement, you could say, is earned. And then every Remenzel achievement advantage is given. Eli would have been the 31st Remenzel to attend. But he ends up being the first who actually can't qualify. And Remenzel's relationship to the school is transactional and monumental. So throughout the story, you could use this as an example. Some of the buildings that they had donated, the dormitory, bird sanctuary, skating rink, and Sylvia's plan to donate 30 beds to the infirmary. They've purchased belonging. The Hilliers have done nothing to donate. They've only performed well on their examinations academically. Irony to draw out, the Hilliers embody the meritocratic ideal Whitehill claims, and Dr. Remenzel loudly preaches, while the family that praises the standards is the one that can't meet them. Tom Hillier is warm and unpretentious about his origins, no chip on his shoulder, while Dr. Remenzel is obsessed with a Remenzel is. So he keeps talking about being a Remenzel and what it means to be a Remenzel, but then when Sylvia had said something about getting social treatment, he gets all angry. So definitely a hypocrite there. Eli's dread in the car makes sense to the young Hillier's triumph. Eli has been handed an identity, a Remenzel. He must live up to it, but did nothing to build it, the lie that is born from that gap. So you could say the lie is he's supposed to be this successful, enter the school as a successful person deserving of respect and this academic education, which you would assume then he moves on to be a doctor. But we learn that that probably is not going to be the outcome for Eli. So you could also say the lie is that just because you're born into a certain family means that you're going to be given certain advantages. Even though sometimes it does seem as though that was the case since the 1700s for the Remenzels. But this story could also be seen as a change in the times, that maybe by the 1960s, obviously we do know that wealthy people from powerful families do have advantages. But this story might show that equality was becoming more of a norm. Although maybe little tiny steps to equality would become more of the norm, because I would assume things like this still happen, where if Dr. Remenzel really tried, maybe he could have gotten Eli in. But then maybe he changes his mind at the end and they never want to return there. So we're kind of left wondering, where is Eli going to go to school? Is Dr. Remenzel just going to accept the fact that he has to go to a regular old school? Or will they move on and try to use their power and influence to get Eli into another private school? We're not really exactly sure with this one. Whatever you noticed about the story and how you saw that these two families were opposite ends of a spectrum, you could say opposite ends of a social class spectrum. And as long as you're backing it up with textual evidence, you'll be good there. And our third question, Dr. Remenzel says the African students that everyone must meet the standards, yet the Whitehill standards exclude his own son. He demands that the board reverse its decision. Meanwhile, Eli, the boy who lied, is the one who ends the story with moral authority to say, now I am ashamed. What theme is Vonnegut developing about privilege and integrity? Why do you think he gives the story's final judgment to the 13-year-old rather than to an adult? Support your answer with evidence. For all of these, you would have their theme, privilege corrupts integrity quietly through self-deception. Dr. Remenzel believes his own rhetoric. When Sylvia asks about the African students who must meet the standards, he proudly answers that everyone must meet them. He scolds her for even asking whether Remenzels get special treatment. His principles are sincere until they cost him something, that being his son's future. The reversal, the moment the standards include his own son, he marches into the board's luncheon and demands an exception. Vonnegut shows that his meritocratic creed was really a decoration on privilege, easy to hold when your family has never been tested by it. The layered lies. Eli tells one concrete lie. He tore up his rejection letter. A child's panic lie with an obvious motive, fear of failing 31 generations of Remenzels. The father's lie is deeper. He lies to himself about what he believes. So you have the father saying that principles are important and it should be followed. But then he doesn't really feel that way when it comes to his son. Eli gets a final judgment. He's the only character who fully owns his failure. His closing distinction, he wasn't ashamed of flunking or even the lie, but what he was ashamed of was his father begging for him to be accepted into the school. You could say the boy's shame is moral clarity. The adult's shame is social embarrassment. Giving the verdict to a 13-year-old inverts the expected authority structure. So normally you would say it's your parents that are telling you that they're ashamed of you. Well, depending. I mean, obviously not, your parents might not be ashamed. But normally it would be the parents doing the scolding and giving the lesson. Whereas in this story, it's Eli giving the lesson. And we might say that that is certainly ironic. And it could show that maybe Eli will end up breaking this cycle, because his dad definitely doesn't seem like the one who's going to break the cycle, seeing as how he immediately tried to use their name and their money to get Eli in, even though Eli did not pass these entrance exams. So you could say that's definitely ironic in the sense that it's Eli that feels ashamed. The ending reinforces Dr. Remenzel gropes for something better to say than "I'm sorry" and can't find it. The man with every advantage is left morally speechless. The boy who failed the exam passes the real test. Good closing discussion question: is Eli ashamed of his father, or of being a Remenzel at all? And does the story offer him any way out of that name? We're not exactly sure in the end. So do we think Eli is... I would almost say that Eli's probably mainly ashamed of his father because of his father's actions. Because the history of the Remenzels, they might have just been symptoms of their time period, where it was a time period where if you were someone with a well-known last name that donated a lot to a school, like how the father had said when back in my day, you just went in for an interview. They didn't even have these tests. So I think Eli might be more, in my opinion, of course, this would be what you can end your discussion, your paragraph with, if you wanted to add into your writing, who is Eli ashamed of at the end? I might say his father, because his father is the one that's with him, and he would be the one that is actually embarrassing him. He was the one that went in and asked for the special treatment, whereas the other Remenzels in his family, I mean, they're not a factor at this point. So it's this idea of ending this cycle of privilege and social inequality. And maybe Eli will be the person in the family who accepts his role in society needs to be earned, not just given. This could be a turnaround moment for Eli. We don't exactly know. But for that question, as long as you're adding your textual evidence to support your response, and if you wanted to add, who is Eli actually ashamed of? Is he more ashamed with himself for failing and then lying? Or is he more ashamed with being a Remenzel at all? Or is he more ashamed with his father? Where does Eli see this fault? And also, do you think you could also make an interpretation or a prediction in this question of how you think Eli's life is going to play out after this incident? Would this be a turning point for him where he realizes that he doesn't want to just be a trust fund kid? You could also say this is nepotism. Nepotism is the idea that your family, usually it's with like celebrities and actors and actresses. If your parents were in the movie industry, then you might end up being in the movie industry. Are you actually a good actor or actress? I mean, I guess that might be debatable, but that is your calling and that is where you have the connection. So what kind of person do you think Eli is going to be? Someone who builds his own destiny and he distances himself from his Remenzel bloodline? Or do you think he might just fall back into this habit? Because at this point, we could probably assume that Eli is someone who has kind of been lacking in motivation if he did do so poorly on this test. Or actually, you could maybe say that maybe Eli has some type of like learning disability and it wasn't really necessarily his fault. And academics just is not his stronger suit, but maybe he'll move on to a career in some type of trade, or nowadays you can get a job in computer science or artificial intelligence. But at this point in Eli's life path, what do we think he is ashamed about? And obviously we would have our theme of using one's privilege or choosing to have integrity. Well, you can use your privilege without being unethical, I guess. Well, I don't know. That might be up for you to debate as well. Do you think you can use privilege and keep integrity? If he would have done well on the test, then maybe, but then he would have just been getting in on his own accord, and there wouldn't have been any reason to even use your privilege. But I guess his privilege gets his foot in the door regardless, because his father was on the board. So those would be your 3 questions for the lie, and that would be our ending of our Kurt Vonnegut Jr. story class.